He dismissed, completely dismissed, gang assault and murder indictments against two of the defendants clearly on video participating in the brutal, savage slaughter of my son.
We begin this busy Monday with the House Judiciary Committee hearing directly from New York City crime victims as they ramp up their investigations into Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg for dereliction of duty.
But when Gascon took office last December, his special directive was criticized as a blanket policy that coddled criminals and ignored victims. Homicides are up, violent crimes are up, and a second recall effort is underway. Even some of his own deputy DAs are publicly critical of Gascon's policies.
Releasing criminals, not charging crime, does not work in Los Angeles, and it's not making anybody any safer.
Welcome. I'm Paul Viollis, and this is Fact-Based News. And what you just saw, ladies and gentlemen, speaks to a crisis you may not even be aware of in our country. And that is the destruction of our system of checks and balances, the very bedrock of our society. And it's all happening from a variety of prosecuting attorneys, right, people you have put in office that are making arbitrary decisions as to what laws to enforce to keep you safe and what laws not to enforce. So, folks, today, it all starts with a question. And that question is, do we or do we not have three branches of government? Now, we're going to get into a lot of this today. We're going to get into our Constitution. We're going to get into the oath that prosecuting attorneys take. I'm not going to cover most of that myself. Thankfully, we've got our legal analyst, the show's legal analyst, Vincent Ancona, is going to be joining us shortly. And Vincent's going to take us through the legal part about this. But for now, what I want to do is I want to benchmark this a little bit. Now, clearly you can see from our B-roll how divided we are on this subject, the views of this subject, and how far across our country it's spreading. So before we bring Vincent in, let me set the stage right now as to exactly what the legal facts are, what the overarching facts are, ladies and gentlemen, to the issue of selective prosecution and or discretionary prosecution. And as with all of our shows, not just will this continuously be fact-based, but more important than that, we're going to lay down exactly why this affects you, why this impacts your family. Now, one little caveat that I want to just touch on before we get going. You're going to see that I'm going to go pretty aggressive against prosecuting attorneys, district attorneys, state attorneys, all the same thing. And for good reason. And for good reason, I'm going to lay that out because it has to do with our safety. It has to do with our system of government. But I want you all to know that I started my career at the DA's office, right? The most famous, the most prolific district attorney's office in the United States, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. So it's not like I'm just spearheading something and I've got an agenda or I got an axe to grind. I don't. In fact, I was hired and I started my career by, arguably speaking, the most powerful criminal justice figure in the history of our country, Robert Morgenthau. But yet, as I look at where we are today and our commitment to serving our communities, we are dropping the ball. So without further ado, let's get into this right now. Do we or do we not have three branches of government? Now, you will see up on your screen, as in most cases, and remember, you can always go to factsbase.com, factbasenews.com, and go to the library, take a look and see all the documents that we're going to talk about on the show so that you can constantly refer to them if you want. So as you will see on the screen, branches of government. We have three. The legislative branch, known collectively as the Congress, for one purpose. The legislative branch makes all the laws. You know, it's funny. My grandsons, who I adore, 12 and 10, aren't even learning this in school. We're having to do this at home. Separate issue. The executive branch. The branch is responsible for enforcing the laws of the land. And the judicial branch. And I quote, "The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts, or meaning all other courts, as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish," meaning all courts. Those, ladies and gentlemen, are our branches of government. Now, where'd they come from? Critical in our discussion today critical in understanding really where we stand regarding selective prosecution or discretionary prosecution. Because Article 1 of the Constitution, our Constitution, again with what I led with, the bedrock of our society, who we are, separation of powers, checks and balances. Before I get into this, think of why this was done. Now, the thing that I constantly go back to is our fourth president, James Madison. And, you know, I'm going to quote something that he said because it was really important. He's also known, ladies and gentlemen, as the father of our Constitution. James Madison argued that in speaking about the separation of powers, and I quote, "It consists in giving to those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachments of the others." He went on to write, and it's on your screen, "Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The interest of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place, meaning the country and its people. Through judicial review, the courts should check the other two branches." This is embedded in the United States Constitution. The courts shall check the other two branches. When we look at selective prosecution, what we're talking about right now is the arbitrary decision of a member of the executive branch, a prosecuting attorney, those that were constitutionally designed and responsible to enforce the law, have decided what laws they will enforce and what laws they won't enforce. Now, I'm going to get into the direct and the collateral effects of those with Vincent here in just a minute. But one last point. In drafting the Constitution, and you'll see this come up on your screen, the framers considered how to order a system of government that provided sufficient power to govern while protecting the liberties of the governed. So what we're saying inside our Constitution, ladies and gentlemen, and it's so important we understand this, what we're saying is very clear, that the bedrock, again, of our society, this system of checks and balances, of separation of powers, was intentionally designed to prevent something such as selective or discretionary prosecution. The concept that each branch performs unique and identifiable functions that are appropriate to each branch, and the proscription against any person, and I say this again, and the proscription against any person or group serving in more than one branch simultaneously. Meaning, ladies and gentlemen, what we see right now going on in this country, as tragic as it is in complete violation of the Constitution. Now, to join us today, and someone that you're going to see quite a bit of, God willing, going forward, is Vincent Ancona. Vincent is not only someone I consider a very dear friend and one of the most valued colleagues I will ever have, but he is a brilliant legal mind. And one of the great things about Vincent is that he's able to draw the line in the sand. He firmly believes that justice wears a blindfold. So when you hear it from Vincent, you're going to hear it straight. Facts. No partisan, no opinion. Strictly facts. He's a brilliant, brilliant attorney that's also a fabulous educator. So joining us today for the first time, and as I said, you will see throughout, as we move fact-based news forward, you will see Vincent on quite a bit. Vin, thanks so much for joining us today.
Paul, thank you for having me. That was a great intro.
Hey, listen, I would have said more, but I'm running out of time. So here's the thing, Vin, let's just jump into the questions. First question I have for you is, what is the oath that prosecuting attorneys take, and what exactly is their role, Ben?
Well, the oath is going to differ from state to state, whether you're in the state or in the federal system, because we have prosecutors for the state level, we have prosecutors on the federal level, but in essence, they all say the same thing. You are there to enforce the rules of the Constitution of the United States of America and for the specific state that they sit in. It's really that simple. Every state, though, does have its own variation and version of it.
Okay, but suffice to say, and for those of us now who are all watching and listening to Vincent, you can see up on your screen a document that speaks to the oaths of public office. You'll notice that there's an example from New York State. There's an example from the state of California. Now, again, go to factbasednews.com, go to our library. This will be in the library. But this speaks to what Vincent was just saying right here, because, yes, what he said is exactly correct, and you can see variations from New York to California, but basically that's what that is. Vincent, question number 2. Who do they report to? I mean, if this is happening, which obviously it is, who do they report to?
Well, look, again, going on the state level to the federal level, they report back to the local or federal government to enforce the rules that they want enforced in their particular communities. Everyone is different in the regards of what rules they're enforcing. So an example would be on the state level, they may be enforcing local rules. Let's say, for argument's sake, driving while intoxicated or criminal cases. On the federal level, they may be enforcing larger crimes that are considered variations or violations of federal law. Things like we would take the Trump indictment or other things of that effect.
Okay, so hypothetically speaking, let's take any jurisdiction. Doesn't make a difference. Jurisdiction X. And this particular prosecuting attorney is elected into office, and he or she is sitting in that office. And that state legislature then has crafted laws to be followed by that Constitution, by that particular prosecuting attorney. So then, as far as who they report to, the way I see this, and I'm also going to be wondering how people are going to write in about this, but the way I see it is they report to the people. Because, in essence, if they make a decision arbitrarily to say, we're just not going to prosecute prostitution anymore, we're just not doing it, which we know that there have been DAs and state attorneys that have done that across the country. We're just not going to do it. Who do the voters go to at this point to say, wait a second, we want you to prosecute that? Who could they complain to?
Well, let me give you an example in New York. In New York, it would be the governor's responsibility to fire or dismiss the prosecutor in a particular jurisdiction if they find that that person isn't doing their job. An example would be Alvin Bragg in New York County in dealing with the Trump indictment. That's the perfect example because there were calls for the governor to let him go. Basically saying you've taken a criminal case and politicized it, and now it's making a mockery of our judicial system in New York. So for the people would have to get together and say, hey, look, let's vote the right person in who's going to reflect our values and our wants. Because, Paul, you know and I know, there's millions of laws on the books, millions. But we've gotten to a place now where it is selective in which ones are enforced and aren't, and that's what we need the voters to realize when they click that box in a voting booth. It's not just about who's going to be sitting up there and making some decisions. They're going to be making all the decisions that count. And especially in places like New York, I could say, they really need to understand that that's the ultimate boss, is the governor.
All right, so let's take a look at the big picture now, Ben. Let's spend some time right now drilling down. I want everyone watching this show to clearly understand how this affects them, how this affects their personal safety, their well-being. So I'll throw a couple questions to you regarding direct and collateral effects to the United States, to the communities across the country. To be clear, what I'm not saying is that the police arrest this individual and then the district attorney decides there isn't enough evidence to prosecute. That's not what I'm saying. That's not selective prosecution. Would you agree?
I agree with that.
Okay.
That's a complete opposite of that.
Okay. Is it also a fact that the district attorney, the prosecuting attorney, is the chief law enforcement officer of that jurisdiction?
They are. They're the ultimate decision maker when it comes to bringing that case.
Okay. So it's fair to say then, Ben, please, I'm not putting words in your mouth. It's fair to say that we're talking about two different things. This is not semantics. When I say selective prosecution, when I say discretionary prosecution, I am not saying that we're dealing with prosecuting attorneys that are making a conscious decision that this particular case that was brought forth by the police department does not have enough evidence in order to move forward with a criminal case. What I am saying, as far as selective prosecution or discretionary prosecution, is they don't even let the police go down that road. Selective prosecution says from the beginning, and this is why I'm needing your insight right now to drill down on, the direct and collateral effects of selective or discretionary prosecution.
Well, it has a trickle-down effect, Paul.
Yes, and what is that? What does that look like?
Well, because what happens is once the police departments know that prosecutors in their particular venues aren't prosecuting crimes that they brought to them on a consistent basis, what happens is those police departments no longer enforce those laws. Now, this is not something that we normally would want our police departments to do. We want our police departments to follow the laws that are on the books, that if they've been violated, those cases are investigated and brought to the DA's office for prosecution. Now, if the prosecutor decides he doesn't have enough in a particular case to bring that indictment, that's his ability under his discretion. But it doesn't mean he has the right to just blanket unravel all the rules that he decides he doesn't want to prosecute anymore. You used the example of prostitution earlier. Those laws are on our books. They sit there in every jurisdiction. Well, maybe not Nevada, but almost every jurisdiction.
Right.
And you have to say to yourself, where do we go now that it just depends on who stepped into the office and whatever he decides and wants to do is going to be the version of our lives for the next 5, 10, or 20 years?
Okay.
That is the biggest issue we have now. Who's running our government?
Wow, that's a great question. So let's go down a little bit further down the road on that. And what's that have to do with every single person listening right now? So give me an example. I'll give you an example. If a prosecuting attorney makes a conscious decision to say, we are not going to prosecute resisting arrest charges. The charge of resisting arrest, when a police officer goes to arrest you, when you resist that arrest, we're not going to charge you anymore. What are the cascading effects to the American citizen on that?
I think that's easy. You're going to have law enforcement get hurt, first and foremost, because every time someone's going to be arrested, it's no longer an issue whether or not you punch a cop in the face. Now think about that effect on society as a whole. You're inviting chaos by just not following the rules that are on the books. You know, look, and don't get me wrong, there are extreme examples of everything. In your particular scenario, you're inviting the public to basically feel free to have a field day on law enforcement. And what that's going to do is create utter chaos in the streets, because then law enforcement is going to do the complete opposite of what you think. They're going to have to protect themselves. That is going to create more harm, more foul, more problems for all of us as a society. All of this because a prosecutor decides on his own he doesn't want to be bothered with the law that's on the books.
Okay, so now one step further. And I can tell you this from a police perspective, and this is a fair statement, whether people want to hear this or not, but it's important that you hear it. As we continue down this road, if you, right now, the voter, if you, the citizen in your community, don't do something about this, let me tell you what this is going to look like in very short order. And I can assure you it's already happening. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but police make a conscious decision. You know what? I may take a little bit more time in getting there. Or B, I just may not get there at all. Because why would I want to get into a fight? Now, ladies and gentlemen, I beseech you, stick with me on this. Why do I want to get in a fight, get hurt? I barely make enough money to pay my bills anyway. I may end up in an internal affairs investigation. The guy that hit me, if I do anything to him, I'll probably get suspended. If I don't do anything, he's not going to get arrested anyway. So that begs the question, ladies and gentlemen, by this one decision not to prosecute this particular crime, police then make a conscious decision to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Vin, maybe I just won't go after that particular case.
Well, let me give you a perfect example of that.
Please.
I can speak of this in Nassau County in New York. There was a series of large auto thefts involving catalytic converters on vehicles in Nassau County. There must have been a ring going around and stealing all these catalytic converters. Local PD found and caught one of the perpetrators after a 25-minute car chase. After the car chase, they brought the case back to the prosecuting attorney here in Nassau County, who decided you know what, we just don't want to prosecute these cases. It's not worth the time and effort. So now, in that example, why would the officer risk his life in a 25-minute car chase that he could have gotten killed at any moment to enforce the laws, only to do all that work to bring it to someone who said, you know what, I'm not interested, it's not worth my time. Now I'm going to give you the fast forward on that story. That particular person who was released by the authorities went back and tried to steal cars on that same block literally a week later. Except this time, they caught an old lady walking out the house while he was trying to steal the catalytic converter. She had a heart attack and died. Now, that direct relation comes to a decision made by one person and one person only, the prosecutor who decided not to enforce the law that was on the books, and quite frankly, not back up law enforcement who was doing their job because they were chasing the law on the books. These decisions have collateral damage and effect, and they run ripples through our society, Paul. Ripples.
So as you close this segment up, Vin, I want to touch on something that I hope and pray doesn't get past anyone at this point, and that's a powerful analogy that you just threw out there. We're still in control of this. We are still in control of this, and oftentimes, you know, I tend to put a lot on our viewers on this and ask them to get involved, but I can't think of too many things in our society that weigh heavier on our personal safety when we leave our house than a prosecuting attorney that makes a conscious decision as to what's safe for us or not. So, last question here for our audience. As you speak to them, in their ability, not just as voters, but as citizens of their community, what do you want to tell them is so important to them that they have to make sure that if their prosecuting attorneys are going down this road, they need to reverse their course right away?
It's easy, Paul. It's 4 letters. V-O-T-E. Vote. Don't you ever forget that it's not something that shouldn't be done. You don't have enough time for it. You need to vote because your morals, your laws, and your safety all come from those 4 letters.
And I will piggyback on this one thing as we close up, Ben. And it's not just vote. And you've heard me say this before, everybody, and I will say it again. It's make sure your elected officials do their job, not just keep their job. And if they're not doing their job, and they're not keeping you safe, and they're making decisions like this in your community, then get rid of them. Call them out, but don't let it go. Vin, thanks so much for joining us. Looking forward to having you back on.
Always great to see you, Paul. Thank you.
All right, Vin. Enjoy your day. Listen, I'm going to go to questions right now. We had a bunch of questions from our audience, but there's one question that I want to touch on right now, and that came from JB in St. Louis. JB says, how do prosecutors keep getting away with arbitrarily deciding what laws to follow? Well, it's interesting that we throw that out there, JB, because of the fact that, you know, we were just covering that. How do they get away with it? Because no one challenges them, because they let them do it. That's why. And I wish there was a better answer, but there is a solution. And the solution is us. We need to take back our ability to not just put the right people in office, but decide who stays in office. That is key. That is the most important part that we need to embrace right now, JB. And for everybody else out there, that's the thing that we need to take with us off this particular show today. And that is how essential it is that we stay involved. Now, as we close up for today, I want to go to the board that you're familiar with from our previous episodes, and you'll be seeing at the end of every single one of our episodes. And that is how we break down what we talked about today, and what's most important is what we leave you with, the takeaway. Bear in mind, you can go to factbasednews.com, you can go to info@factbasednews.com, and you can email us questions. You can, by all means, hit us up on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, and I'm pretty sure that's it, but there's a bunch of them. There's no way you can miss us. The point being, write us, let us know what you want us to cover, let us know if there are questions, And I assure you, I promise you, I will get you an answer. Regardless of how many come in, I will get you an answer. If I can't read it on air, you will get a response from me. I will email you personally. I want to make sure that we are a repository of information for you. Nothing but facts. So let's close out today and let's look at this. First thing up on our board is number 1, Article 1 of the Constitution, the purpose of the 3 branches. We must remember what the purpose of the 3 branches are, because it speaks to, again, the bedrock of our society. Separation of powers, not one becoming more powerful than the other. Number 2 is the prosecutor's oath to support, not deviate from the Constitution. You saw in what the document was that we put up on the screen as far as the oath. Vincent mentioned to you as far as what the criteria is for each state. It varies, but the one overarching issue is that they must follow the Constitution of their state and the United States, and they must enforce said laws. Must. Wasn't should, wasn't could, it was must. Number 3, your responsibility under the Constitution to be an involved voter. Democracy falls apart, ladies and gentlemen, when we remove people. You. We've done that too much. We've given control up to too many people that are more concerned with keeping their job than doing their job. Well, shame on us. You know what? Call them out. If you hired someone to fix something at your house and the guy never showed up, are you just going to say, all right, well, I paid it, whatever, and go pay somebody else? No. You're going to hold them accountable. They can give you analogy after analogy of that in your own personal life. Well, us as voters, our elected officials, hold them accountable. And in this case, especially those prosecuting attorneys. 4, the enhanced risks to you and your family selective prosecution brings. Why do I put this up on the board? Because I want you to remember some of the things we talked about today, the analogies Vincent mentioned, the ones that I mentioned. But the biggest one is the cascading effect of every single component, every single law that a prosecuting attorney decides not to prosecute. Because it affects you, without question. 5, the big picture. If this continues, we completely lose objective law enforcement. We can't do that. It's not an option. We can't allow it to be an option. Because when chaos sets in, ladies and gentlemen, I assure you of one thing, and I'm not sure of a lot, but I assure you of one thing. When chaos sets in and we remove our history of enforcing the law, we leave it in the hands for those who want to drive around in the back of a pickup truck with an automatic weapon and decide, well, I guess I'll take over this town. And don't think that won't happen, because it will. And we can't let it. And all we have to do is get involved, put the right people in office and hold them accountable. We can't let this happen. We cannot lose that ability to enforce our law. So please, hit us up next week. Check out our next episode. We're going to be talking about the common denominators associated with mass shootings, such as mental health. Any questions? Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Questions, info@factbasednews.com. But please get involved, especially with us, because your opinion matters to us. Your questions, your thoughts, they matter to us. Write us. I'm Paul Viollis, and this is Fact-Based News.